This lesson will give you an overview, geographically in particular, of the Roman expansion. It's not so much focused on the details and the names and the dates as it is on the geography and the general overview of the way the Romans expanded. At the end, you'll see the kind of details, not all the details of the wars, but you'll see some of them. So right here you're looking at a map of the Italian peninsula. Rome is located here. At first, Rome expands to its north and south. Veii, in particular, is one of the earliest places in which Rome expands. And even further north are the Etruscans. And you'll remember during the regal period, 753 to 508, there was a period, the last three kings were Etruscan. That might have been because Rome allied with the Etruscans, or the Etruscans actually conquered the Romans, but eventually those kings were driven out. So if you're looking at the early conquest of Rome, they start expanding north. Veii is among the earliest conquests that you can mention for Rome. Conquest of Veii, again, Veii is right here to the north of Rome, is 396. By the time they get down to this instep of Italy, about 272, that's the phase in which they take on most of the Italian peninsula. They don't get involved with the Celts by 272, really, but they take care of this region right here between 396 and 272. That's the first major phase of Roman expansion. Now to look a little bit ahead, I don't want to get too far ahead, but still, after they expand beyond this region right here, they get involved with Sicily, Corsica, and Sardinia. Then they go into Spain. Then they'll turn toward Macedon, and they'll have three wars down here with Carthage. I should point out Carthage before I point out Macedon, but that's just an overview. You can see that the last slide I mentioned to you the regal period, 753 to 508, and then I mentioned to you the expansion in the Italian peninsula from 396 to 272. That's the Italian peninsula. Now this map is showing you Rome about 218, another 60 years after that initial phase in the Italian peninsula when they start going outward from the Italian peninsula. Now look at it by 146 BC. By 146, they're finished with Carthage for a third war, and they've gone in against Corinth for a war of conquest, and they've got northern Greece, the Greek mainland. They've even moved into Anatolia, or Asia Minor. They've got Spain, entire Italian peninsula, Sicily, Corsica. So you can see this unfold very rapidly. Now, when we do get into the details of the conquest, it'll be helpful to know the geography of this region. So again, there's Rome. Here's Etruria to the north. Veii, among the first known conquests of Rome, is to the north as well. Down here are the Sabines. This area right here is occupied by Greeks. It'll be often referred to as Greater Greece or Magna Graecia. Here's Sicily. Here's where Rome's greatest enemy, arguably, is Carthage. They fight three wars with Carthage. In the process, they acquire Sardinia and Corsica from Carthage. And Sicily was really dominated by Carthage at a certain point. There was the Greek city of Syracuse and lots of Greeks on Sicily as well. And then we've mentioned before that the Celts, who are often also referred to as the Gauls, are up here to the north. This direction is where Greece is. This direction is where Spain is. The Alps are up here. The Apennines go down the spine, the center of Italy. The Tiber River runs through Rome. Those are the names that you've got to be somewhat aware of to follow the details of the conquest. Here's a good overview of where it is: Africa, Europe, Asia. Now let's look at this again in the big picture. If we're talking about Veii in 396 and southern Italy finished the conquest around 272, that's this region right here in red. They don't yet have the Carthaginian lands, which are in green. All the green areas controlled by Carthage, Carthage, and Carthage. Rome's going to take or want all of that area right there, and that's going to be some of its earliest conquests. Remember, 3 wars with Carthage. The wars with Carthage are called the Punic Wars because they're Phoenicians who come from this area right here, and Punician, I guess, is what the Romans kind of end up butchering the name. The Phoenicians become the Punicians. Right here, you have the kingdom of Epirus. You'll have Pyrrhus get involved in Rome, in Roman wars. He's from Epirus, so is Alexander the Great's mother. Macedonia is one of the successor kingdoms that emerges after the death of Alexander the Great. They largely control Greece, but there is some pockets of independence in Greece. Egypt is controlled by the Ptolemies. This area is controlled by different people, but eventually most of this area right here comes to be controlled by Seleucus, and then there's the little kingdom of Pergamum right there. Tiny but rich. Most important wars by far are the wars against Carthage. Again, look at this map. There's where Carthage is. This shows, again, Carthaginian sphere of influence, which is all over northern Africa, the coast here, fertile and rich land, southern Spain, lots of metal found there, lots of good exports to be found in southern Spain in particular, metals, agricultural goods, fishing off the coast. It's a great area to control. This slide shows some of the more major wars, or battles rather, of the Second Punic War. How from Carthage and controlling southern Spain, Hannibal, for example, goes right across the Alps into northern Italy, and he wins battle after battle against the Romans, and even works his way down to the south where he continues to win battles. He's a devastating general, Hannibal, in the Second Punic War out of 3. And these 4 slides, these 4 maps right here, show all the major wars that they fought, all the major battles in this Second Carthaginian War, Punic War it's called. The Carthaginian Wars are called the Punic Wars. This one's the Second Punic War. And then it finally ends when the Romans go straight to Carthage, and they actually make Carthage surrender. Again, here's this crucial war, the Second Punic War against Hannibal, 218 to 202. 218 to 202 BC. This is often called the Hannibalic War. And these slides down here, you can see where Rome goes from in this phase to this phase, where they take this huge amount of Spain, and they get Sicily and southern Italy. And then they go up against Carthage in their Second Punic War against Hannibal. Again, just to orient you, here you are again. It's about 264. That Second Punic War is not until 218. By 264, what we're talking about is the start of the First Punic War. So here's the state of things in the First Punic War. Second Punic War is 218 to 201. The Third Punic War is 149 to 146. 3 wars against Carthage, trying to control their territory and establish dominance in this whole area right here, the Western Mediterranean. Then they'll turn their sights on Greece and the former kingdoms of Alexander the Great's successors will fall one by one to them. The last slide was the start of the First Punic War, 264. This slide is the start of the Hannibalic War, or the Second Punic War. You can see the gains that Rome has made already at this point. Now, after the first 2 Punic Wars, again, you're talking about 264 to 241, and then 218 to 201. You get into the conquest of Spain. That's a little bit later, but that's associated with these wars because that's where the Carthaginians were dominating in southern Spain. Then, after this, around the same time, that they're doing the Second Punic War, 218-201, you get into this conflict with Macedonia. 215 to 205, they start getting involved with Macedonia right here. They have a second Macedonian War, 200 to 196. 200 to 196. And then a third Macedonian War, 171 to 168. Meanwhile, the Romans are playing the Aetolian League and the Achaean League off of Macedon. Rome is promising them that they're going to give them freedom from the dominance of Macedonia, but after they help them fight Macedonia, they turn on the Aetolian and Achaean leagues and conquer them. By 146, they'll have conquered, for example, Corinth. That's the same year that they finished their third Punic War, which is 149 to 146. So by 146, they've finished off Carthage for the third time, and Corinth with the Achaean League. Here you can see the expansion of Rome in green down to about 201. 201 is the end of the Second Punic War. All the areas in green are Roman territory. And then just about 100 years later, they've conquered Spain, parts of southern France. This is where the Gauls or the Celts live. They were in northern Italy too, but the Romans pushed them out of there. They've got Macedonia. It takes 3 wars to conquer them. They take care of Carthage in the course of 3 wars. And then by 133, for example, the king of Pergamum, the last king of Pergamum, wills his kingdom to the Romans. And the Romans go in and conquer the rest of that area. So they've basically got this entire Mediterranean basin, with the exception of Libya and Egypt by this point. They have not gotten there yet. But by about 100 BC, which is what this map shows, they have the green and the areas in orange. Starting with Veii in the north in 396, down to southern Italy and the Greeks there in 272. Then they expand outward. The First Punic War, 264 to 241. The Second Punic War, 218 to 201. The First Macedonian War, 215 to 205. The Second Macedonian War, 200 to 196, etc., etc. And here's a map by 129. You see Pergamum is taken, 133, and the surrounding area. You see the Macedonian, the Italian Peninsula, Corsica, Sardinia, Carthage, Numidia not taken yet, by the way. You've still got some independence in northern Africa, but Spain is almost all the way conquered, parts of southern France, and they don't have Egypt yet, and they don't have the Seleucid kingdom yet. And over here is a kind of new Persian Empire. The Romans never really get too far in that area. At one point they will go down to the Persian Gulf, but really their expansion ends in the Seleucid dynasty right here. So here's a convenient list. This isn't every detail of the Roman conquest. There's more even after this, important steps after this where they get into Egypt, for example. And the Roman Empire doesn't reach its full expansion yet even. But this is a period of great expansion, their greatest and fastest expansion. And this is really what becomes the heart of the Roman Empire on this slide right here. You've got the First Punic War, you've got to know that date, the Second Punic War, then they go right into the First Macedonian War, the Second Macedonian War, a brief Syrian War. This is against a Syrian kingdom. It's not really fought in Syria. It's a side note, I didn't even mention it in the rest of the slides. The Third Macedonian War. This is the final victory over Perseus of Macedon, the end of the Antigonid dynasty. This is when the author Polybius, who writes a description of the constitution of the Romans, comes as a hostage to Rome, and the Macedonian monarchy ends forever. Polybius is important because he's a great source for the authors of the American Constitution and the founding fathers of the United States. The conquest of Spain happens, besides what they gained in the Punic Wars so far, the larger conquest of Spain goes from 150 to 134. A particularly important battle is the victory over Numantia by Publius Cornelius Scipio Aemilianus. Publius Cornelius Scipio Aemilianus is a name that you should be familiar with, one of the major players in this entire Roman history course. In the Third Punic War, they finish off Carthage, just like they finished off the Macedonians in 168. Again, this is Publius Cornelius Scipio Aemilianus. And then the victory over Corinth in Greece, it's not like Corinth is such a major threat to the Romans, but it's an important one. It happens in the same year that they finished the Carthaginian Wars. They're the leading city at this point in the Achaean League, and the Achaean League of cities, again, wasn't a threat to Rome, but it was holding its own against Macedon. It was an independent and important city that Rome could have had as an ally and did have as an ally against the Macedonians, but then it turned on its ally. It's just the way Rome works. It doesn't really hold long-term alliances. It conquers everyone in its path. Rome made an example particularly of Corinth because they tried to resist when the Romans intervened in their affairs, and what they did is they literally broke that city down brick by brick and left almost nothing of it. They destroyed the whole city, and they sold a lot of the population into slavery to make an example of it, so that other Greek cities and other Greek leagues that were forming or existed wouldn't resist Rome. That's what Rome was not so mean to you if you joined them willingly, but they were harsh and made an example of you if you resisted. And then finally, relatively minor point is that Sulla went into Athens and sacked Athens in 86 BC, took a lot of its art and treasures out of there and money. Again, Athens was not an important city at this point militarily, but it was culturally still a very rich city. And so it's an important, but minor note in the Roman conquest in the Mediterranean. And just briefly, here's a overview of the larger picture in the course. This Archaic Age, it corresponds roughly to that regal period in Rome. They had kings, and that's when the Romans are kind of moving into Latium, which is the area surrounding Rome. That's where the Latin language is related to this region in which Rome is located. But so there's very little conquest, but they are expanding even at this earliest Archaic period or regal period. During the Classical period, this roughly corresponds to the struggle of the orders, or partly corresponds to it. So does the Roman Revolution. They overlap a little bit. And that's when they go in and they conquer most of Italy, down to the south. During the Hellenistic Age, which is the political period in Greece, this is largely occupied, about half of it at least, by the Roman Revolution, and this is where they get really, this is when their conquest really occurs, kind of in this Hellenistic period, the Roman Revolution period. They conquer much of the Mediterranean. The fall of the Republic happens around 88 to 31. It's all part of this Roman Revolution. It's a slow but pretty devastating decline. And then you get into an imperial period that starts somewhere around 31 BC, and Rome itself falls in AD 476. During the end of the fall of the Republic right there is also when they conquer Egypt, and Egypt is the last of the Alexander the Great's former conquest, the last of the successor kingdoms to fall. So there's a kind of overview in the bigger picture